Masechet Yevamot, Daf Samech, we are continuing with the discussion of who can a Kohen Gadol marry. And so we begin Tenura Banan, Anusat Atzmo Umfutat Asmo Lo Yisavim Nasa Nasui. A case we talked about already. If a Kohen Gadol Anusat rapes a young girl, or Mifutat, or seduces her without physical force, to be with him, but they are not married. So now this girl is turned into a be'olah. She's no longer a betulah. And so therefore he cannot marry her, even though he himself was the one that caused her to lose her betulim. Nevertheless, at this point, she is a be'olah. He cannot marry her. If he does, b'di'avad, if he goes ahead and marries her anyway, then the marriage is valid. We'll see, does this mean that they can stay married or not? We'll discuss. Now, second case is Anusat Habero Mfutat Habero. Let's say there was a young girl who was raped by someone else, someone not related. Or was seduced by someone else not related. Lo Yisa, then the Kohen Gadol cannot marry her either. Again, she's not a betulah, she is be'ulah. She was not married before to anybody, but she lost her betulim. V'im nasa, in this case, if he goes ahead and marries her even b'diavad, it seems that it's not good. It would be Eliezer ben Yaakov omer havalad halal, chachamim omerim havalad kasher. So the suggestion seems that a simple reading is that in the first case he can remain married to her, nasa nasui. In the second case, while the marriage is a valid marriage, nevertheless they need to separate. They are not allowed to remain married. And if they have a child, what's the status of that child? The Be'el ben Yaakov is machmir and says the child is a halal, and will never be able to eat terumah. If it's a girl, not be able to marry a Kohen. Chachamim say, no, the child is fine, does not affect the next generation. Okay, why should there be a difference between if the Kohen Gadol, he himself is the one that caused her, that was with her at first, or if it was someone else? So coming up, basically, we'll explain that, let's say a Kohen Gadol, a regular case, a Kohen Gadol takes a betulah. After the consummation of the marriage, his bride is no longer going to be a betulah after that night. So, nevertheless, obviously, he can stay with her. Otherwise, how would a Kohen Gadol ever be able to remain married? Therefore, this case is not so different. Even though their first time together, they were not married, and it was a cause of a rape or seduction. Nevertheless, because he himself was the one that caused her to become a be'olah, he's not allowed to marry her. But if he does, he can remain married, because at that point, it's the same as a regular marriage where he first marries her and then he makes her not a betulah. So that case is therefore more lenient than a case where someone else altogether is the one who takes away her betulim, not the Kohen Gadol. So then she's just a be'ulah. All right, so that we can understand why there will be a difference between them. All right, so we're going to analyze each of the sections of this baraita. First we say, Im nasa nasui. Amar Rav Yehuna, Amar Rab, Mosi beget. So when we read this, the peshat of the baraita seems to be that they can remain married. If the Kohen Gadol himself was the one that violated her, then he shouldn't marry her, but if he does, they can remain married. But Rav says, no, this means he has to give her a get, and divorce her. We say, this doesn't make sense, but the Braita said, if they marry, they are married. So then what would that clause come to teach me if he has to divorce her? So Rav Acha bar Yaakov is explaining the statement of Rav Huna Amar Rav that in the case, particularly for the case of mifuteh, he doesn't have to pay. You see, case of mifuteh is different than the rape case. In the case of rape, he has to both pay and he has to marry her again if she wants, and therefore take care of her for the rest of her life. In the case of mifuteh, it's either or. You see, the pasuk says ki yefateh ish. The rape case was in Devarim. The seduction case is in Shemot here. Betulah shelo arasav shechabo ta'moharim harena lo leisha. If a person seduces someone, he has to pay the bride price, because now she's not going to be able to get that bride price from someone else. And if the father says, no, I don't want to marry you, then he has to pay kemohar betulot, as the bride price, and not get married. So either he gives the bride price and marries her, or gives the bride price as a fine, one or the other. And so the chidush here is that im nasa nasui, this is considered a marriage, and therefore the Kohen Gadol does not have to pay the fine because he married her. So he would have paid, I guess, a bride price as part of the marriage, but not as part of a fine. Although it doesn't mean that they can stay married, he still has to divorce her. All right, that does not seem to be the Peshat of the Braita, but this interpretation is a bit more difficult. All right, we're going to challenge this. Azal Rav Geviha mebek ketil, amara l'shmata kemed Rav Asher. So this Rav Geviha from this place went and told this statement, this teaching to Rav Asher. Amar levaha Rav Rabbi Yochanan d'ameret hadvayhu bogeret umukat es lo yisa v'im nasa nasui. Says, hold on, this makes no sense because after all, Rav, and this was said in the name of Rav, right? In the name they said that in the case of Bogeret and Mukat Es, in the case of a woman, a girl, she's older than Na'ara, and we saw the opinion of Rabbi Meir that says now she is no longer marriageable to a Kohen Gadol because she has to be with her fullness of her Betulim and not older. Or Mukat Es, a girl who had an accident and because of that the membrane was torn. In both of these cases, the Kohen Gadol should not marry her, but if he marries her, she is married. Now, if you say this phrase, im nasan nasui, means he doesn't have to pay a fine. Kohen Gadol doesn't have to pay a fine. There is no fine in the case of Bogeret and Mukas. No one to pay a fine to. So therefore, that would not be applicable in this case. Therefore, since you cannot interpret this case here as meaning that he has to give a get but pay a fine, so too in this case it cannot mean that he has to give a get but pay a fine. So therefore, this is not correct. This cannot be a correct interpretation. Alma, sofa liot bogeret tachtav, sofa liot mukat es tachtav. Hachaname sofa liot be'olah tachtav. Rather, the explanation for these cases, bogeret and mukat es, is that although he has lichatechila, the Kohen Gadol should marry someone who is a na'ara and is not mukat etz, who has her betulim fully intact. Nevertheless, bidi avad, if he marries her, they can remain married. Why? Because in the end, she is going to become a boget. In the regular case of a Kohen Gadol who marries a Ne'ara, she in the end is going to grow up while she is with him. They do kiddushin and marry while she's Ne'ara. Eventually, she's going to grow up and she's going to be a boget, and they can remain married. And even if she has a full betulim at the time they get married, eventually when they consummate their marriage, she is going to be the same as if a mukat etz. Her betulim will be broken, and therefore here too we say that she in the end is going to become be'olah under him, and therefore the case of the Kohen Gadol who raped or seduced a girl and took away her betulim before marriage is, although not allowed, and he's not allowed to marry her, but in the end, after that happens, is equivalent to a Kohen Gadol who correctly married a betula and then took away her betulim after marriage, and they can remain married. So to here they can remain married, and kashya, and this therefore is a challenge to the interpretation of Rav, that it means that they cannot remain married; they have to have a get. Okay, so that was the first clause, where the Kohen Gadol himself is the one that does the seduction or rape, and the simple reading is that yes, they can remain. He's not supposed to marry her, but they can remain married. Anusat chavero mutat chavero lo yisav im nasa. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov omer avalad halal. Chachamim omerim havalad kasher. The second clause, when it's a different person, again, someone not related, and not a case of incest or anything like that, right? Just someone who she could have married, but he instead did not wait for that and seduced her, raped her. Then this girl is a be'ula. Kohen Gadol cannot marry her. If he does, then they cannot remain married. And if they have a child, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says it's a halal. Hachamim say the child is okay. That's what the Braita said. Amar Ravuna, Amar Rav, halacha ke'Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. We follow halacha like the stringent opinion. The child from that resulting from Kohen Gadol with this be'ula will be a halal. We're going to have to see why exactly that would be, because what's the status of this prohibition? It may only be an aseh. Okay, we'll see. A second tradition in the name of Rav, that we follow the stringent opinion that the child is a halal. Okay, that's all one version. The first version was just statements. Halacha is like the stringent opinion, but the second version is going to give an explanation for Ika de Amre. Amarav Huna Amar Rav, Mai Ta'ama de Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Savala ke Rabbi Elazar. The reasoning behind Rabbi Eliezer Yaakov to say that the child is a halal is like Rabbi Elazar. We saw his opinion on the previous stuff. Rabbi Elazar has the most expansive definition of zonah. He says, we call a girl zonah not only if she was involved in a prohibited relation, but even if it was a panui and a penuya, a single man and a single woman who have not related, no problem of incest, no problem of a Kohen, whatever. Just two single people having relations out of wedlock, she is called a zonah, and she cannot marry a Kohen, any Kohen, and certainly not a Kohen Gadol. So if you call her a zonah, that's included in the lo ta'aseh, and that's the reason for it to be Eliezer ben Yaakov. Some other guy raped or seduced her, and that by itself she designates her as a zonah, according to the Rabbi Elazar, and that's why if she marries a Kohen Gadol and they have a child, the child will be a halal. Okay, that's explanation. But we challenge this. Hold on. Is it true that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov follows the opinion of Rabbi Elazar? Mishnat Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov kavenaki ve'ilu beha amar Rav Amram amar Rav en halacha ke Rabbi Elazar kashya. It can't be, because we have two different principles that now will oppose each other. We say whatever Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says is kavenaki. He's the one that said halal, and kavenaki means succinct and clean, meaning we always follow the halacha. He doesn't say that much. He's not very wordy, but whenever he says something, he says it authoritatively, and we follow his opinion. So therefore, it would be halal. But regarding the ruling of Rabbi Elazar, the expansive definition of zonah, Rav also said we do not follow that. So there's a contradiction. You can't tell me Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov follows Rabbi Elazar and halacha is like him when halacha is not like Rabbi Elazar. So he can't say that Rabbi Eliezer follows Rabbi Elazar. This is confusing because their names sound the same. Don't tell me Rabbi Eliezer follows Rabbi Elazar and halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer, because that can't be, since halacha is not like Rabbi Elazar. Kashya. So we leave that as a challenge. Instead, we're going to see a different explanation for Rabbi Eliezer. Amar Rab Asher Amar, B'yesh halal mechayave aseh kami palger. What they're arguing is, does a halal result from a relation that's prohibited, not by a lav, but rather by an aseh? We'll see this in a second. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Sabar, yesh halal mechayve aseh. The Kohen marrying a be'ula is a violation of an aseh, and Rabbi Eliezer says if someone violates an aseh, the child is a halal. That explains his opinion. Rabbanan Sabre and halal mechayve aseh. The rabbis say no, does not result in a halal. Okay, what pasuk are we talking about? It's right here. My tamad Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov dichtib almana ugrusha v'chalala zonat ele lo yikach ki im betula mamavikach isha. So this is regarding a Kohen Gadol. He cannot marry almana, even an almana. Gerusha and chalazona, even a regular Kohen cannot marry. So the people he can't marry. Et ele lo yikach. So that is lo ta'aseh. Is lo yikach for them. But then it says ki im, but rather he must. Ki'im betula ma'mavikach isha. So the second half, where it says a Kohen Gadol has to marry a betula, is said as an aseh, as a misvat aseh. So there you go. So since it's the second half that says the aseh, uchtiv lo yechalel zar'o be'amav akulehu. The next pasuk says lo yechalel zar'o be'amav, not meaning that the second pasuk lo yechalel is what will cause a halal. And this pasuk comes after. So according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, everything in pasuk 14 is included in pasuk 15. Pasuk 15 says, Lo yechalel, what will cause halal? both cases in Pasuk 14, both the lo ta'aseh of mana gerusha zona and the aseh of he has to marry a betula will cause a halal, and that's his opinion. So Rabbanan, how do they counter that? Elle hifsika inyan. So he says, look, amana gerusha v'chala zona et elle lo yikach. Elle is a pause. And therefore, according to him, you stop there. There's a separate matter regarding ki betula ma'ama vikach isha. And then, according to them, the lo yechalel, what causes a chilul? Only the first half up until ele, but not the second half. That's a mitzvah. So only a lo ta'aseh causes a halal, not violating an aseh. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov amar ele lemeut nida. Rabbi Eliezer would say, oh, that word ele is not coming as a stopping word, but rather as including, coming to exclude a nida. If a Kohen has relations with his wife as well while she's a nida. Now that, on the one hand, is a very stringent matter. That would be chayuv karet. And nevertheless, it was not included in the halal should a child result from that relation while she is nida. And meaning, right, nida, remember, is not means a woman can't become pregnant while she's actually bleeding. But if she never goes to the mikveh, she never gets cleansed, she'll still continue to be nida. And so if he does have a child while she's nida, child is not a halal, even though he violated something that's actually more stringent. That the word ele comes as only these will cause a halal and not another prohibited relation. Okay, so that's what Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov does with the ele, but he doesn't think the ele stops, and everything in this pasuk will cause a halal, including the mitzvah aseh of marrying a betula, aseh marrying a betula. Keman azlah hadetanya, and now let's point on this topic. This baraita me ele ata oseh halal ve'ata oseh halal minida. Keman, this baraita, this is the word ele, comes to say that anyone in this pasuk, any of these relationships will cause a halal, but not a nida. Who does this follow? Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, as we just said. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, nichtebe le'ele lebasof kashya. The last question, yeah, but if the word ele was not coming to be a separation, right, to teach nida, then really you should have put this word at the end. You could have read the pasuk better as follows. You could have said, put the second half first. Betula ma'ama vikach isha, almana ugrusha v'chala zona, et ele lo yikach. And by switching the order, you would have the ele at the end, and then the ele could have said et ele to exclude a nida, and it would have read more smoothly. From the fact that the pasuk is not that way, but rather the ele is right in the middle, that suggests a support for Rabbanan that say there is a separation, and only in the first half, the lo ta'aseh, that will cause a halal, but the violation of mitzvah ta'aseh will not cause a halal. So we end with kashya. That completes the first topic, which was Kohen marriage to a girl who was raped or coerced. And now we get to the second topic. It's related because the word betula appears in yet another law regarding a Kohen who can become tameh to his sister only if she is a betula. And so once we're defining what the word betula here is, we can compare it to a definition in this law. Later on, we're going to see a very important law about can a Kohen marry a convert. Cannot, but why not? All right, so let's see regarding a Kohen becoming tameh. Tenora banan achoto arusa. Rabbi Meir v'Rabbi Yehuda omrim mitamela. Rabbi Yosef v'Rabbi Shimon omrim en mitamela. Let's look at the pasuk first. Regarding a Kohen cannot become tameh lamet for anyone, for general people. However, talking about a regular Kohen, not Kohen Gadol, regular Kohen can become tameh for the six immediate relatives: father, mother, daughter, son, and brother and sister. And then from a Dirasha we learn also his wife, She'era. Now, regarding sister, it's complicated. Torah says, V'lachoto habetula hakerova elav asher lo hayeta leish lah yitama. When a Kohen can become tameh for a sister only if she is a betula. And then the Torah adds these words that really are superfluous, seem superfluous. Hakido ba'alav, who was close to him. The idea is that when she's a betula, so she's single, she's living at home, and so they is close to him. Asher lo hayta leish, she was not with another man. So look, if she's married to another man, then for sure, then her husband's family will probably take care of her when she dies. But this is saying more, even if she cannot have been with another man. If she was with another man, it sounds like no matter what, even outside of marriage, la yitama. So he can only become tameh for his sister to take care of her burial if she's betula and close to him and was not with another man. Okay, so that's what we're going to have to define what the word betula and all these phrases come to include or exclude. So we start off here with the case of arusa. Let's say she was only me'oreset to another guy, but not yet nisuin, so they did not do any act of bi'ah. She's still living at home. Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yosef say lenient. Yes, the brother, she died while she's arusa. The brother can take care of her. Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Shimon say, "En metamele, no longer. She is now on her way out of the house, and so the brother does not take care of her." Anusa umefuta dibra kol en mitamela. Since the pasuk says a betula, and now if she was raped or coerced, she's no longer a betula. Sorry, the brother cannot take care of her. She's not going to go unburied. Other people will take care of her. People are not related. But the brother cannot. Umukat ayes, what if she's not a betula because of an accident, but not because of any other person, but because of a branch or anything like that? And mitamela dibre Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon is the most machmir, and he says if she has no betulim, even because of an accident, no. But it sounds like everyone else thinks that yes, mukat ayetz, the brother can still bury her. Shayad Rabbi Shimon Omer. Rabbi Shimon's reasoning is Ruyad Kohen Gadol mitamela she'en Ruyad Kohen Gadol and mitamela. Rabbi Shimon explicitly compares the word betula regarding a Kohen Gadol and says only someone who a Kohen Gadol could marry, who's defined as betula, that's the same as a regular Kohen can become tameh to her. And since a Kohen Gadol cannot marry someone who is mukat ayis, therefore, even a regular brother cannot bury a sister who is mukat ayis. So Rabbi Shimon exegetically is going to be interesting here in making that comparison. Ubogeret mitamela debire kol adam. Nevertheless, even though Rabbi Shimon said this, and bogeret, we saw actually is a machloket. Bogeret meaning a woman who was never with us. She has betulim. She was never married, anything. She's just older than 12 and a half. Even though there was an opinion of Rabbi Meir that says a Kohen Gadol should not marry Bogeret because she's already doesn't have the full betulim, and nevertheless everyone agrees in this case that she is called a betula to the extent that the brother can bury her if she dies. All right, so those are all the opinions, and we have a quick summary outline because we're going to be deriving each of these. So let's get it straight. It does not, for rape and seduction, everyone agrees cannot become tameher. That's not betula. Bogeret, everyone agrees that yes, Bogeret is fine. She has her betulim. She's just a little bit older. That's fine. The big machloket is arusa. Rabbi Yehuda says that's okay, becomes tameh, because she's still betula. She only had kiddushin. Rabbi Shimon says no, she's mostly married. That's it. No good. He's not called kirova elav, not close to him anymore. And mukat ayetz. There, everyone says it's fine. He can become tameh to her, except for Rabbi Shimon, because he makes the connection with Kohen Gadol the strongest. All right. So now we'll see two ways to interpret these pesukim according to each of these opinions. Mai tamad Rabbi Meir v'Rabbi Yehuda. Dar shehachi. So Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, they're the ones that were lenient in the case of in arusa, right? That was Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. So let's see. Dar shehachi. V'lachoto betula perat le'anusa umefuta. So the words achoto betula, only if she is betula, if she has a virginity, anusa mefuta, do not have betulim. Everyone's going to agree with that. Yachol shani mosiach mukat ayes. Well, a mukat ayes also, she had an accident, but she also doesn't have her betulim. So should we exclude her? No, only if she was not with a man. only if she was with a man, and that caused her betulim. But here, she was not with a man, it was just an accident, and therefore, she can be buried. The brother can become tameh to her to bury her. Misha vayata al ish, right? That's only when her becoming a be'olah was through a man. Yasta zo she'en havatayda ish, but this person mukates is excluded because her becoming a be'olah was not through a man. Okay, good. That's hasharat ish. Hakeroba. What does it mean that she is close to her brother? Lerabot arusa. Arusa is still close to her brother. She's still close to her own family's her own family. She doesn't yet move into her husband. So therefore, she can be buried. That's the main point of Rabbi Meir ben Yehuda. And the word elav, lerabot haboged, hakiroba. Elav, extra, could have said hakiroba. Elav includes bogedet, which everyone agrees that bogedet the brother can become tameh. All right, so that's how he learns it. Ha lamali kera v'amar Rabbi Meir betula afilu miksat betula mashma. Hold on, we asked just about this last part. Why do you need a word to include bogeret? Didn't Rabbi Meir said that the word betula by itself, if you have only the word betula, it means any amount of betulim, even a little bit, even if she's older, right? Rabbi Meir back then, he was the one that says a Kohen Gadol cannot marry a bogeret because it says bibtuleha. The extra letters on bituleha means all, full betulim. But if you had only betula by itself, it means any betulim. So you don't need the word elav to include it. So we say istirich sakadatecha minan lepetulam betulam mehatam mahla na'ara afkana me na'ara kamashmalan. No, I need it because I would have thought to make a gezerah shava. Since it says the word betula regarding Kohen Gadol and according to Rabbi Meir, Kohen Gadol can only marry someone who has full betulim, meaning only someone under 12 and a half. So too, I might think I'll make a gezerah shava here and say that ki'im betula means that a brother can only become tameh to a sister if she's also under 12 and a half. And so that's why I need the extra word elav to say, no, even bogedet, any type of betulim. All right. So now we got the shita of Rabbi Meir ben Yehuda. Now let's revisit the Pesukim and see how the other two opinions will explain it. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon, my tamayhu dar shehachi. So the word only for her sister who is a betula, that will exclude someone who's a victim of rape or seduction. Now they add umukat etz, and also will exclude mukat etz. Now this is interesting because really only Rabbi Shimon excluded mukat etz, not Rabbi Yosef. So the Gemara will talk about this and say this mukat etz is actually only going to Rabbi Shimon. All right, asher lo hayta perat la arusa, that she was not with someone. Asher lo hayta, she's not with someone. That excludes an arusa, because an arusa already is on her way, engaged to marry someone. So this is different from Rabbi Meir ben Yehuda, because they said arusa, he can become tameh, and Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Shimon says arusa cannot because of this asher lo hayta. Now hakeroba lerabot arusa shenit garesha, but the word kerova comes to include if she was did kiddushin with another man and then was divorced, she goes back to her family's house. In that case, the brother once again can become tameh for her. So that's very interesting that according to them, they agree halfway. Although it's true that if their sister does kiddushin with another man, that's it. She's already, we call her hayata leish. But if she got divorced before they got married, and so she's still a betula, then she comes back, and then the brother can become tameh. Elav, lerabotata bogeret. So the word elav, they agree with what we said before, includes bogeret. Everyone agrees that bogeret, because he does become tameh to her. Hakeroba, lerabot arusa shenit garesha. Now we're going to analyze that phrase that you said. Keroba comes to include that the brother can become tameh for someone who was engaged and then divorced. In that very braita, Rabbi Shimon was the one that compared the brother becoming tameh to a sister with Kohen Gadol. And he said, anyone who a Kohen Gadol can be anyone who Kohen Gadol can marry, a brother can become tameh to, and if he cannot marry her, he cannot become tameh. Now, if someone was engaged and divorced, arusa and nitgadasha, Kohen Gadol cannot marry her. She's a gerusha. So we should say also that the brother, regular Kohen brother, cannot become tameh to her, according to that logic of Rabbi Shimon. And we answer, oh, that's exactly why we need the word kerova to come to include and say, don't think it follows the rule of equivalence of Kohen Gadol. Kerova comes to include if she got divorced, then she's back home and the brother can become tameh to her. Good. Wait, if you have the word kerova, and kerova comes to include something, why not say it also includes mukat etz? Because after all, the mukadet, she's living at home, she's close to her brother, just by accident that she lost her betulim. No, we said we can't use it for two things. Kerova achat velo shetayim. I can only use kerova to include one item, the nitgarsha, after edusin, and I cannat use it to include mukades. Umara'ita. Wait, well, why did you choose one over the other? It seems arbitrary. And the answer is ha tabid ba'ma'aseh, ha lai tabid ba'ma'aseh. The mukat etz, there was an action on done to her because of this accident, and something went into her, and she lost her betulim. So therefore, it makes more sense to exclude her. She doesn't have betulim, whereas the woman who was nitkadesha, and now nitgadesha, nothing was done to her. Her betulim are intact, right? She just accepted a ring and then accepted a get, and so that's easier to include her as someone who is close to home, and the brother can become tameh for her. All right, so far so good. Hold on, Rabbi Yosef, back in the original Braita that we saw, he did not agree with his partner, Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon said, only I think that mukat etz is excluded. So we can infer that Rabbi Yosef thinks that mukat etz is included, like Rabbi Meir, and that a brother can become tameh for a sister who's mukat etz. How does he know that? Minaleh, from the words me lo hayeta leish, from the words she was not with another man. Only if she was with another man and lost her betulim because of a man, then he cannot become tameh to her. But in this case, it wasn't from a man, but rather from a branch. So this is the same derivation that the Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda used. Okay, Veha apikte. Hold on, we already used that phrase. The Rabbi Yosef and Rabbi Shimon learned from that the phrase lo hayta leish, that to exclude someone who is arusa. She is already on her way to be with another man. So we use that phrase once. You can't use it twice. We answer had me lo hayta vechad me leish. No, we can split this into two and use it for two things. Therefore, from the words lo hayata, she was not with another man, right? She was not with her arusa. So if she was with an arusa, then she's out of the house. And that's one thing. And the word leish means only if she lost her betulim from a man and not mukat etz. So that will explain Rabbi Yosef and why he diverges from his colleague Rabbi Shimon. Okay, the word elav, we said l'rabot habogeret, and now we're going to just one more time analyze this, that this comes to include a woman, girl who's more than 12 and a half, and already she's bogeret, but she's still betula, that the brother would become tameh according to everyone. And we ask about this. Rabbi Shimon betula shelema mashma. Way back, right, when we had the machloket between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Shimon about whether a Kohen Gadol can marry someone has to marry someone less than 12 and a half. Rabbi Meir said no. Rabbi Shimon said yes. And the way he derived it was from the fact that the word betula by itself means full betulim. Then betuleha means any betulim. So according to Rabbi Shimon, the word betula by itself means full betulim, means, which is equivalent to under 12 and a half. And therefore, how come he doesn't say here that betula and means full betulim and exclude a bogeret? The answer is tamadide nameha tamehacha. Actually, Rabbi Shimon over there, when we discussed can a Kohen Gadol marry someone who's a bogeret, the reason why he said the word betula by itself means full betulim was actually from this very context here. The darishachi mide elav l'rabot habogeret bichlad betula betula mashma. Since you have an extra word elav to include bogeret, that means that without that word, if I had only the word betula, because it says kim that he has to marry a betula. If I had only this achota betula, I would have thought that meant only under 12 and a half. That's why it adds the word elav to say also a bogeret. So actually this is the source for why he says his opinion over there, that the Kohen Gadol, if he had only betula, it would mean full. Betuleha means any betulim, and the Kohen Gadol can marry even someone more than 12 and a half. All right, and so that's how each of these various Tanaim explain the pasuk, and this is really an interesting pasuk because it does have all these extra words and phrases and limitations that are pointing to something, but exactly what you apply each one to is a bit ambiguous and accounts for these three different reconstructions. All right, and now we're going to get to the topic of a Kohen who marries a convert. Tanya, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer, Giyoret pechuta mibat shalosh shanim v'yom echad keshera lichuna shene'emar v'chol hataf banashim asher lo yodu mishkab zachar hachayu lachem v'le pinechas imahem. So first we have to introduce the basic law. Why can a Kohen not marry a convert? The Torah does not say anything about this. There is one pasuk in Yechezkel that does say something about it, but let's focus on the Torah because we don't use Nevi'im as an authoritative source for deciding halacha. So what is the reason? We're going to see later on this Amud that it's because of zonah. The Talmud considers every convert to be in the category of zonah. It's likely that they were promiscuous before they converted, and therefore we're going to assume that they are all zonot. Remember, zonot doesn't mean that a prostitute that was paid. It has a more expansive definition when it comes to the prohibition of a Kohen, meaning pretty much anyone who did any prohibited relation before, according to Rabbi Eliezer, even if it was a non-prohibited relation before, but not within marriage. Okay, so whatever the reason is, there are other Rishonim that give different reasons, but this seems to be the basic reason. She is called a zonah, and therefore Kohen cannot marry a convert. Everyone agrees to that. The only question is, what about a convert who was not with a man, or could not possibly have been with a man? So Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai is the lenient opinion here, and he says that a convert who converted when she was less than 3 years old and 1 day, in that case, any act she might have done is not even considered a sexual act. And so, therefore, there's no possibility to call her a zonah. So she can marry a Kohen, right? When if she converted before that, then she can marry a Kohen anytime after, even when she grows up. And how does he know this? Well, it's from pasuk regarding the war in Midian, where the Moshe comes. Hashem says, "Go and avenge the Midianim." And then they do, the commanders go and they kill the men. And Moshe comes back and the soldiers are so proud. Look, we did a good job, right? And Moshe gets angry and said, you let the women live? The women were the very ones that were the perpetrators of the sin that caused the people to go astray before that. So then Moshe adds another commandment and says, go v'chol nashim hataf banashim, even the children of the women, even the girls who have not known a man, you should leave alive, but no one else. And so that means that he did allow to live girls who had not been with a man. We're understanding that to mean who could not possibly have been with a man, and which means less than 3 years old. So Moshe allowed them to keep them alive and were taken by Bnei Israel as wives, and Pinchas was among them there. Pinchas is a Kohen, and so we can learn from this that a Kohen is permitted to marry someone who could not possibly have been with a man before she converted, which is under 3 years old. And that's Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's proof. All right, Rabbanan. Now the Rabbanan, this is in Masechet Kiddushin, we see the machloket. Rabbanan say no, a Kohen cannot marry any convert, even if she converted when she was less than 3 years old. So what are they going to do with these Pesukim? They're going to say, Lavadim lishvachot. It means that when Moshe said you can keep them alive and take them as spoils, these young girls, that means not as wives, but rather as servants. So they're not marrying them. Now we turn back to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and ask him, if you think that they were marrying them, then bat shalosh shanim v'yom echad nameh, even more than 3 years old, if we can ascertain that they were never with a man, then they should also be allowed. Well, how come you stopped yourself at 3 years old? Why not even more? And so the answer is Kid Rav Huna, the Rav Huna Rameh. Ketiv kol isha yodat ish miskav zachar haroghu. Rav Huna noticed a contradiction within those Pesukim when Moshe commands them. By the way, as a tangent, there's a Midrash brings up an ethical problem. How could Moshe have told them to go and kill these non-combatants and to kill the woman? And it says that Moshe got angry 3 times, and all 3 times he gave a mistaken ruling. And right after that, in fact, Moshe does not teach the next law, but only El Azad. And so there is the Midrash does question whether this was the ethical command to do, and whether the soldiers even fulfilled it or not. Okay, anyway, end of tangent. The Pasuk does say that on the one hand, Moshe says 2 Pesukim back to back. First he says, Atayidgu kol zachar bataf, go kill all the men. Okay, so they're out. V'chol isha yodat ish mishkav zachar harogu, any woman who was with a man, then you have to kill. So, okay, fine. So any woman that was with a man. But then the very next pasuk says, "Kol atap anashim asher lo yadeu mishkav zachar hachayu lachem." Any children who were not with a man, then you can allow them to live. So the question is, what's the distinction? Is it adults versus children? If so, you could have just said that. But when it talks about adults who were with a man, that sounds like adults who were never with a man, betulot, bogrot, then you can keep alive. And then for the children, it says children who were not with a man. But what if children were? Then you have to kill them. So we have a contradiction. There's a gap between them that is ambiguous. So from the first pasuk, we would infer ha'enayodat kayamu. If they were adults, but they were not with a man, you can let them stay alive. And from that, we can infer further that only for adults is there a distinction between those who were with a man and not with a man. But for children, no matter what, you keep all children alive. If we had only pasuk 17, but then it says, but then children, only if they were not with a man, you can keep them alive. But from this, it sounds like if the children were with a man, you do kill them. From the first half, it sounds like children, even if they were with a man, you don't kill them. So we cannot interpret this straightforward as meaning that they, in fact, did have bi'ah or didn't have bi'ah. But rather, when it says they were with or were not with, it means was it someone who could have potentially been with a man or not. And once you interpret it that way, then you remove the contradiction. So the potential for bi'ah, that would mean anyone 3 years old or less has no potential for liba'el, and therefore you can keep alive. But anyone older than that, they have potential. They could have been. And so therefore, that's why the Bisham Omerecha makes that cutoff of 3 years old, because it's not the actual bi'ah, but if they were biologically developed enough that they could do an act that could be defined as bi'ah. Tanya Namehachi, and we have a Baraita that supports this. The Baraita gives the same derivation. So this Baraita sets off the hypothesis, which is the correct interpretation. Yodat Kol Isha Yodat Ish means anyone who is fit for intercourse. It doesn't mean fit, or maybe actually someone who actually did have intercourse. Well, it's talking about children, and it says anyone who did not lie with a man. So you see, it's talking about children, therefore it's talking about fit for intercourse. And so these children are defined as those who are unfit for intercourse. That means only less than 3 and 1 day. Okay, now the question is, how did they know, right? They didn't have birth certificates to know exactly how old they were. How did they test out each of these Midianite girls to see if they were fit or not fit, 3 years old or more? Amar Rav Huna bar Bizna Amar Rabbi Shimon Chasida ha'ebirum lifnei hasis. They would pass each one before the seats, the front plate of the Kohen Gadol, and if her face became morikot yarok, which today means green, but it could also mean yellow. If her face became pale yellow, then that means de'uya li ba'el. But if their face did not change, and so that means they were more than 3 years old. If their face did not change, then they are not fit for bi'ah, and that means they are less than 3 years old. Okay, Amar Nachman, Siman Abera had hidrokan. What does the faces becoming yellow have to do with anything? Well, in general, a sign of sexual immorality is a disease called hidrokan. This is a Greek word, some kind of disease of the liver or heart that makes people pale. And so according to this test, even in potential, if they could have sinned already, they would have this pale color when reflected off of the seats. Okay, it was a miraculous test, so don't try this at home. Kayose badavar ata omer. Vayimseu miyoshevei yavesh Gil'ad 400 ana'ara betula shelo yad'u ish lemishkav zachar. Another test, similar test in a different story, and this is the story of Pilegish Begiv'ah, where eventually there was a war, and they found among the inhabitants of Yavesh Gil'ad on the other side of the Jordan 400 na'ara betula, the 400 virgins who never were with a man, and so they kept them alive because they wanted. Beforehand, they had wiped out almost the entire tribe of Binyamin, and this is now the whole tribe is going to be, there's going to be no more Binyamin. They found these women and they said, okay, from these women we'll keep them alive and they can repopulate the tribe. Now, how did they know whether these 400, how did they know that they all were betulot and that they were never with a man? Mindayadeh, what was the test? Amar Rav Kahana, hoshivum al pi chavit shel yain. In this case, doesn't seem to be about 3 over, less than 3 over 3, but about actually were they betulot or beulot. So they did the barrel test, which we've seen once before. And sat upon a barrel of wine. If she was a be'olah, then the smell of the wine would go right through her. There was no blocking, nothing blocking. But if she was betulah, then the membrane was blocking, and so the smell would not go through her and out of her mouth. And so that was the test. All right. Hold on. Why did they do that test? Why didn't they do the same test as the other one and they do the seats test? Amarav kahana bered Rav Natan lerason lahem ketiv lerason velo lepur'anut. No, because regarding the seats, it says the seats should be make them accepted before Hashem. The seats should only be used for something positive and not to show their guilt. So we wanted to. So over here we're checking to see if they had been with a man. So that's checking for something negative. So we can't use it for something. You can't use the seats test for something negative. Wait, and with binyan, isn't that the same thing? Also, we were testing them for something negative. No, that only applies to someone that's part of Bnei Israel. Regarding the Yavesh Gil'ad, they were part of Bnei Israel. So for them, we only want to use the seeds for something good, not something bad. So that's why we'd use a different test. But for the Midianites, it doesn't say that they are not included in this restriction, and so for them, We can use that even for good, both for good and for bad. Amar Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi Amar Shibri Yoshua ben Levi Halacha Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. So Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi says halacha is in fact like the more lenient opinion that someone who converts as an infant is fine to marry a Kohen. Amar Rabbi Zera Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi beferush shemialach or mikelala shemialach. Rabbi Zera asks him, hey, what's your source for this? That you said you learned it from Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Did he say this explicitly, or did you only derive it by an inference of something he did? Maikelala. So before we answer that, first we're going to say, what is the kalal? What was the story that happened that he might have learned it from? All right, there's different ways to learn. Sometimes the teacher might say explicitly, this is the law. Other times you see the teacher do something, and then he derives it. But when you're deriving it from a story, maybe he misinterpreted the story. Maybe that wasn't the very reason why he permitted in that case. So let's see. What was the story that he might have inferred it from? Damar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. There was once a city in Israel, and there was contestation about the lineage of these people. There was a problem. Rumor went out, says people in the city, the Kohanim, cannot be trusted. V'shiged Rabbi at his problem with their lineage. V'shiged Rabbi at Rabbi Romanos ubedakaha. And so Rabbi Yudah Nasi, he's the head of the land, he's the Nasi, so he sent Rabbi Romanos to go and check out the city. What's going on there? Why are people saying that their lineage is not good? And he found that there was a case there where a Kohen married a girl, married someone who had converted when she was less than 3 years old. And that's why all the people said, oh, look, this happened, and then this guy had children, and then those children would be halalim if she's a zonah. And so now they said, and those children, maybe they had children too. And so now this is a big problem. But Rabbi Romanos came, and Rabbi said, they're fine, they're totally fine. It was less than 3 years old. It's okay. So you see from this story that he must follow Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, who says that a Kohen can marry someone who was converted as an infant. So now to the answer of Rabbi Zera's question, Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi says, no, I didn't get it from that story. He told me explicitly that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi told me explicitly that halacha is like Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Okay, now we wonder, what's the difference? And so what if he did learn it from a story? Why would we have any doubt about the conclusion? Well, because we might have said maybe that case is different because it's a b'di'avad case. Sometimes a rabbi will permit something only b'di'avad, but doesn't mean lechatechila you can do it. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai said lechatechila Kohen can marry someone who converted as an infant, and so but here maybe it'd be only permitted it b'di'avad because he already married her. Stay married. After all, we have in this other case, Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, they both said that a Kohen Gadol should not marry a Bogeret and Mukat Etz, who does not, Bogeret who's more than 12 or bitulim are weakened, or Mukat Etz who does not have bitulim because of accident, should not marry Lechatechila, but B'diavad, they can stay married. So there is such a concept regarding Kohen marriage. And so that's why it's important that you heard it explicitly, because maybe according to the story it was only b'di'avad, like other cases that are b'di'avad. Then we reject that. Hechi ashta, no, there's no way you could have made such a mistake, because bishlamatam sofa liot bogeret tachtav, sofa liot beula tachtav. We only might say that that b'di'avad it's okay, even though lechatechila even though lechatechila it's asur in those cases, because in those cases with the Kohen Gadol, in any case, if he married a regular girl, perfectly fine betula, and not mukat etz, after they consummated their marriage, as we said at the beginning of the stuff, everything comes full circle here. Since after the consummation, she would have been be'olah, and the Kohen Gadol can remain married to his wife, obviously. Maybe that's why, in those cases, we allow them to remain married b'di'avad, even though she was mukat etz or bogeret, and so he was not the one that caused her to lose the betulim from his own consummation of the marriage, but it was because of something else. So in that case, yeah, it's easy to say that lechatechila no, b'diavad yes. But here, you could no way to apply that logic. Would we say the same thing here, that that she would become a zonah anyway? This is the key line. This is where we see that the Talmud thinks that the problem with a convert is zonah. So the point is, if you think it's really a zonah, then the chetechila and b'diavad it has to be prohibited. If you think it's not a zonah, then it'll be permitted in either case. But there's no way to make a distinction. If it is in fact zonah, and that's what it says it is, we're afraid of the convert, that beforehand they did prohibited things, and so there was no reason to, in a case of a regular Kohen who marries a perfectly fine woman, we don't say, oh, she became a zonah after, right? She never becomes a zonah as long as they're just with each other and everything's fine. And so therefore, even if you learned it from a story, it still would have been a clear-cut conclusion, but it happens to be that he also heard it explicitly. Okay, now all that is one version. Now Rav Safra matne la mikilala. Rav Safra, a different Amora, he actually heard this law from Rabbi Yoshua ben Navi, but he learned it from the story. He didn't hear it directly that says halacha is like Rabbi Shimon Mordechai. He heard the story, he heard what Rabbi did, and he said, oh, I guess it must be allowed. Okay, and to Rav Safra, we went through the same exercise, and we asked him, wait, how could you learn from a story? Maybe that was only okay, b'diavad, but the chetechila, you can't marry them. And he answered the same way we answered here. No, we only make a distinction, the chetechila b'diavad, in the case of mukades and bogeret, but there's no reason to make a distinction here. If he allowed it b'diavad, he must have allowed it lechatechila as well. All right, and finally, last story. One time there was a Kohen who married a convert, someone who converted as an infant. Who was less than 3 years old in a day. Amar le Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak came to this Kohen and says, what are you doing? How are you marrying a convert? Amar le Amar Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Navi, halacha ke'Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. He says, what's the problem? I'm following the halacha, because Rabbi Yoshua ben Navi said, the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, who permits a Kohen to marry lechatechila, someone who converted, as long as it was less than 3. Amar le Zil Apik, okay, good line. He says, go and remove her, go and divorce her. And if you don't, I'm going to remove Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi from your ear. In other words, it's a kind of threat, or else. The idea of the threat is, you're listening to Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, but you should not listen to him, even though he said that is the halacha. Well, we don't follow that. And if you don't divorce her, then I'm going to excommunicate you. I'm going to force you to divorce her. And I'm going to get that voice, opinion of Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi out of your ear. And so even though this whole time we said, yeah, we follow it, and the Rabbi followed it, it was a story that followed it, nevertheless, in this final story, concludes that we cannot follow this leniency of Rabbi Shimon bar Halacha L'Ma'aseh follows the last story. Rambam and Shulchan Aruch make no exception for an infant, and they say any convert is prohibited from marrying a Kohen, and so that is in fact the Halacha L'Ma'aseh, despite the entire discussion before, follows this last story. Baruch Adonai L'Olam, Amen ve'Amen.